Hello. Glad everybody is here tonight. I am super excited about tonight. Tonight, I get to interview Will Kimbrough. Now, if you're from Mobile, Alabama, if you're from Nashville, a lot of the Southeast, if you've listened to great Americana music, then Will's name is somebody that you know. I've been watching Will play for a long time. He can play rock, blues, folk, jazz. He can play it all, and he is an amazing songwriter, gifted guitar player, and a gifted singer. So, without further ado, let's bring on Will. Will, how are you doing?
I'm good, Ivan. Good to see you.
Oh, good to see you too. I really have. I've been watching you since, goodness, I would say the early '80s.
Hmm.
I would guess Ground Zero would have been
Yep.
my first introduction to you, and I want to say was it Dr. Feelgood's? Was that the
Dr. Feelgood's Thirsties.
Thirsties?
Poor Richards.
Poor Richards, and you
Mhm.
guys were a three piece. Ground Zero was a three
Yeah.
piece.
At the very end, Sam Baylor started playing guitar for us, and out of that came the Bushmen.
So is
But
that
so it was a three piece at first, and the tail end of Ground Zero was the addition of Sam.
now? Has it ever occurred to you, or has anybody ever said to you anything to the effect of like, what a big influence Ground Zero was? It was a cover band, but you guys sprinkled some originals in there. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And, but even the covers that you did, they were not the covers that people were doing.
Right. Yeah. So we're talking about the early '80s, and so people were just mostly playing what was on the radio uh, in Mobile and in the Gulf Coast. So
Sure.
it was, I guess, what ended up getting called sort of stadium rock or
Hmm.
corporate rock. Foreigner, Journey, great bands, but kind of stuff that was you could just hear on the radio. And
Right.
I had actually been turned on to some other music on the radio in Mobile when I was a kid. WABB in the mid '70s was an underground sort of FM album oriented rock station,
Right. That's true.
and that's where I heard Springsteen, pre-Born to Run Springsteen. I heard Elvis Costello, I heard Graham Parker, Tom Petty, and then of course all the progressive like Allman Brothers and Sea Level and all that stuff. John Prine, Jerry Jeff Walker, all over the map. So at the same time that I was getting into Kiss and Aerosmith, like other 12-year-old kids
Sure.
in 1976, I also went to see Springsteen. I went to see Prine. I went to see Jerry Jeff, and I knew about Costello, Graham Parker, and Joe Jackson, and all that stuff. And then in '77, WABB became a top 40 FM station.
Right.
And so then I had a couple of years, and I was playing music, and we just played, you know, Allman Brothers, Stones, Southern Rock, in this cover band I was in before Ground Zero called the Henry Guin Band, and we played like skating rinks and bar mitzvahs and stuff, and then just wherever, at Murphy High School and stuff. And but I met this guy named Richard Gallo, who was the bass player for Ground Zero, and so I was about 16, and I picked up a little 3x5 card that was thumbtacked to the bulletin board at the music store at John Mathern's music store on Azalea Road,
John Mathern. Yeah.
Music World,
Yeah.
and I called this guy Richard Gallo, and he was 22, and he had moved from Atlanta. He worked for NCR, National Cash Register, so he was a computer guy in the early '80s. So punch cards and whatever, cassettes and who knows what, floppy disks, I guess. And but anyway, I went and met with him, and I played him a couple of my own songs, and then he told me about the Atlanta music scene at that time, and it was very exciting to me. And he said, "Well, your songs are pretty good," and so we started working up my songs, and we wrote some songs, and we recorded them on his 4-track reel to reel, and then we worked up all our favorite Elvis Costello, the
Right.
Jam, the Clash, the Kinks, the Who, the early Beatles, the early Stones. We like that kind of 2 minute, 2.5 minute, 3 minute, snappy songs.
Right.
And then we worked up U2 and and
Pressure
so
Drop. You guys played Pressure
Pressure
Drop.
Drop, which was a Clash's version of that reggae song by Toots and the Maytals. And so yeah, I mean, the education of get going deep into a kind of music can lead you all over the place, you know. I mean, I was always the kind of kid who like read the liner notes and who wrote the song. So the Allman Brothers at Fillmore East led me to buy a T-Bone Walker record and led me to buy Willie McTell record, who wrote Statesboro Blues. And then the same thing, the Clash, they talked about music they loved, and I went and bought their records. So I bought a Professor Longhair record and a Toots and the Maytals record, you know. And so I got this sort of what's the word, autodidact education
Sure.
by just being interested in music. I mean, that's what most musicians do, right? We're just interested in something, and somebody turns you on to something. And sometimes I remember this band, the Raisins, who became the Bears and became the Psycho Dots, and they were friends with Adrian Belew. And Sam took me to see them in Pensacola. They'd come down every year and play Pensacola at this bar called Kevin's in La Playa.
Oh, wow.
And just like they'd have a low budget vacation and stay in these little motor hotel rooms, and they'd play 5 nights because that was, you know, how they could afford it. But they were so good. They were like Adrian Belew's friends, and they became his band. So when I went to see them, and they sounded like King Crimson meets Little Feat meets XTC meets the Beatles meets NRBQ. So it was like all the stuff that I've ended up liking, which is like kind of new wave songwriting and roots rock and, you know, snarky songs and sincere songs, all the stuff. I guess I just kind of like what I think of as is good. But anyway, back to Ground Zero. So yeah, and I'll tell you this, to answer your question in a less long-winded way, is that I just got a message from a patron on Patreon, because I do a Patreon page, which is like, you know, you can, if for those that don't know, it's a format where you can subscribe to a creator's creative content. And so I give people new music every month and do live streams. And I've got a podcast that's sort of mirroring this book I'm writing, which is about what we're talking about, which is this now into its 5th decade, which is pretty unbelievable, of trying to do music every day and try to be creative.
Right.
So I'm now into the 5th decade. But so a patron who's from Mobile wrote me the other day and said, I wish you would do a piece on that band and how those cover songs influenced my life, meaning this old friend. And he said, I didn't know that those weren't your songs. I just knew they were songs I'd never heard before, and then we got to know them through your band. And so that's I think that's something that gets overlooked in music sometimes, is that you don't have to write a song to inspire somebody or just entertain somebody. It doesn't have to be original, but if you want to make a living at it, you need to write the song and own the copyright.
But that was, I mean, what your friend said is absolutely true for many of us.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time I was a teenager, and I would get into Dr. Feelgood's with the fake ID. It was a wonderful fake ID. But I saw a ton of shows there, and I would honestly, there was times when I was like, I didn't know if you were playing originals or covers. And we had a friend who unfortunately is no longer with us, but a friend in common, Chris Browning. Yep. Chris told me, and it makes perfect sense now that you've answered what you've or said what you've just said, was that did you used to travel to New Orleans to buy records, like to make?
Yeah, and I recently made a trip a few years ago. I made a trip with my friend Doug Matthews, who we went to Murphy High School together. Mm-hmm. And we used to borrow his dad's car or my dad's car and drive to New Orleans on like a Saturday and go to the record stores. And there was a used record store called Record Ron's, and it was on Decatur Street right there in the quarter, by the French Market. And then there was a place uptown on Magazine called Leisure Landing, which is now like a dress shop or something, but it's near the Peaches Records up there. But anyway, and then we shopped at the Record Bar in Mobile, and all the Rainbow Records, all the mm-hmm. record stores, Sound Shop in the mall, and but Record Ron kind of got our taste. He called us, my friend Doug and I. He called us collectively. He'd just say, "Hey, Mobile, how you doing?" He knew we were the two nerdy guys from Mobile that would come in looking for records, and he would put stuff behind the counter, and save it for me. Like he sold me my first Richard Thompson records when I was into the Clash. I mean, he was like, "You might like this." Because he had seen me like asking him about records, and he was like, "You might actually like this." And so that changed my life too. When you hear Richard Thompson play guitar for the first time, you're
Sure.
like, oh, okay. How does he do that? He's like bending three strings, but it doesn't sound like Hendrix or anything. It doesn't sound like Jimmy Page but anyway, so yeah, and also I would say this, that learning all those cover songs myself, those ones that weren't just the usual songs, um, was obviously an education for me, because I learned those songs and learned those lyrics, and then I started to get my own. It influences how you put together your own songs.
Well, I would say over the years, as I've watched you play, and I've seen you do a lot of late night after hours things where maybe you weren't necessarily like you'd come up on stage and play, and you're very, not only are you talented, but you have a wide range of ability that I bet a lot of people.
Yeah.
I've seen you play speed metal at 2 a.m. And so I feel pretty special.
World's
about
slowest
that.
speed metal.
But
I'm sorry about that, Ivan.
That's okay. It's okay. I bet I've said in my head, I was like, man, that boy has played every note on that fretboard, and in every kind of way. And so, but do you think, or looking back, and this may be an unfair question, was there any at all awareness that you were funneling this new music into Mobile when you had to be a teenager?
Oh yeah. When I was 19, I thought I definitely felt like I was, I was just so excited about it. I don't think I sat around and thought about it. I was about to say something like I was egotistical, but I think I was just so sure of myself.
Sure.
That when I loved a song, or I thought a song was cool, here comes my dog.
What's his name?
His name's LB. It's Larry Billy Bob Alabama Kimbrough is his name. So here he is. We've only had him for a few weeks. So
hey, LB.
It's a good LB, dog. Little LB. He might want to stay. No, he doesn't. Go downstairs, dude. But I think I loved that music so much. I remember we even did Mystery Achievement by the Pretenders.
Yes,
so I sang like the Chrissie Hynde song in the original key, and Mystery Achievement, But we loved it so much, we just wanted to do all those songs, and we knew that nobody else was playing them. So, we definitely felt like we were doing something cool. But I guess that's the bravado of a young band. You need to feel like you're doing something cool. The Stones thought they were being old black bluesmen or Chuck Berry, and nobody else in London was doing it as much. The Beatles had done a few Chuck Berry songs, but they didn't play the blues like the Stones did.
Right. And
so they were swaggering young boys, and that's part of that thing. And then what's lucky for me is that my interest was in all kinds of music. And so it's provided me with a lifetime of trying to live up to that interest.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Like I like the blues, and then you actually get, like, I just produced Shamika Copeland's last record, and I just produced her upcoming record. And I know about the blues, and I have my version of it, but she's a real blues singer, and her dad was Johnny Copeland. She's grown up in it. She's lived in it.
Steeped.
But it was fun. They just wanted me to help them make a record, and so I just tried to keep everything that we did. If it steered too far from what I thought was blues, I would mention it, and she would do the same. She'd say, "No, it's not really in the." And we weren't trying to be. We were trying to stretch the boundaries of the genre a little bit. That's kind of her thing, and so I've gotten a lot of opportunities. I've produced country records and blues records and rock and roll records, and then I've tried to play sort of my version of jazz kind of stuff, and there's a lot of improvisation in all that music anyway.
Was Bus Stop a Ground Zero song? I feel like I saw you play that at Dr. Feelgood's, but Will and the Bushmen did it too, right?
Yeah, we actually put it out. Yeah,
I want to play.
Actually, yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt. I want to play a little bit of Bus Stop, and then on the other side of it, I want let's kind of move into Will and the Bushmen, because Will and the Bushmen definitely had a huge influence on a ton of people in a big portion of the country. So let me play this, and we'll just kind of.
Yeah,
That
I love
that
that one.
God
That's a
take.
huge song for me.
What's
Yeah,
the
well,
story behind it? What was the
I mean, that's you know, we REM gave REM gave the band REM gave Southern young people permission to do original music.
sure
I mean, they really did. And there were plenty of other bands that were paving the way, but they were the ones, and they came and played Mobile, and we opened for them at the Sanger
at the
Theater.
Sanger?
And yeah, and I had already, my friend Rob Truck spoke to me. He was at South Alabama,
Hmm.
University of South Alabama, and he was the booking agent. I'm pretty sure they made $1,500, and that was the most money they had ever made. And they left there and drove back to Athens that night after the show, and then they made the Murmur record. They had made their Chronic Town EP. But so REM was like, you had permission to do your own stuff, and also they had that same, what you heard on that song was that crazy interplay that's not like really just like a rock band. It's
Right.
like this weird Latin rhythm, and then this galloping like country drum beat, and then these jangling guitars, and then one guitar, Sam's playing that low guitar that's almost like a horn section. There's so much interplay going on, and Mark's playing those like like rumba New Orleans bass parts,
But you
and
guys
then
were
it
good
makes
at
this.
that. You
Oh
guys were
well, yeah,
good at that.
we just did whatever we'd work up a song, and nobody tried to be the boss, and and so that was the best recorded music we ever did, was the stuff that we were in charge of. And that's a lesson I took away from those years, of which was a short time. Considering how long I've been doing this now, I've
Hmm.
been living in Nashville now for 32 years. And so only the first 4 of those years were the Bushman years,
Now you guys
88 through
played.
92.
You guys played. Will and the Bushmen played. I mean, so Ground Zero sets you up for Will and the Bushmen. Will and the Bushmen then
Yeah.
kind of. You guys are playing all over the southeast, and maybe even beyond.
Yeah.
A lot of the college town bars, frat parties, things like that.
Yeah.
But you guys were people were clapping just as much for the originals as
Yeah.
for the covers.
Well, that was
Uh,
kind of the goal. Like Ground Zero turned into a cover band more than anything. That's how
right,
we made our bread and butter.
right.
And we recorded one. I have a cassette of mixes of some recordings we did, and I somewhere they're digitized in a hard drive. I need to do it again now that I have a better converter. And but I was disappointed that we hadn't put anything out. And although it wasn't anybody's fault, it was my own fault. I was the leader of the band, really.
Sure.
And but I was too busy like playing gigs and
And you
driving
guys
around
were
the van
always
and
playing. You
partying.
guys were
We
always
played all the
playing.
time. We became a working band, which is something like I wanted to be a working band, but I wanted to be doing original music. And Ground Zero just kind of ground to a halt. We didn't do it. And then Sam had joined the band, and we were writing songs together. He was writing songs, and I was writing
Hmm.
songs. I wrote Bus Stop. I wrote Numbers, and then and I think Sam and I wanted something more. And even though we probably could have just, I don't know, we didn't know anything else but just to go play gigs. And so to stop playing gigs would mean to stop making money. Not that we made much, but we made enough to live.
Right.
And it just like bands do, we just sort of imploded. And I had met Mark Pfaff, and he was in this band, the Jive Bombers, which was like a rockabilly blues band. And so I was getting into that too. I was starting to learn like Freddie King and the Stray Cats,
Hmm.
and Eddie Cochran, and just more roots music was interesting me. And so I befriended Mark. We briefly had this band called the Inverted Oreos, which was like a jazzy band, bluesy jazz band, with a sax player named Theodore Arthur, who still plays in Mobile, still
Yeah.
plays like in the Excelsior brass band, and plays all the Mardi Gras stuff. Great tenor sax player. And then Rat Connell on drums, Mike Connell on drums. And he's the drummer on Bus Stop there. So he's
Okay.
playing that cool like train beat that also has these crazy rolls. And so he is much older than us. I think he was 37 at the time, and I was 19. So he had grown up with really with Hendrix. He saw Hendrix. He saw Cream. He played he wanted to play like Ginger Baker, and we were trying to play like new wave. And so that's why the Bushmen were a little bit different. You had a guy on bass that really wanted to be like in Jefferson Airplane, a guy on drums that wanted to be in Cream, and then you had these two guys that wanted to be in REM, but who had grown up on the Allman Brothers. So we could play solos, whereas, Peter Buck never really played solos. And that was part of what made them so different from the
Sure.
traditional rock and roll. But we could still, like, I remember one review said that Gawk sounded like REM meets U2 with Dickie Betts on guitar. And I always thought that was pretty cool.
That is
And I
cool.
mean, at first I was like, what do you mean Dickie Betts? And then now I'm like, well, yeah, it means you had two guys who could play guitars
Right.
and solo. And anyway, so we formed the Bushmen just on the whole premise that we would make a recording. And that's the first thing we did. We played our first show Thanksgiving 84. So it was the end of 84. And then Gawk came out in 85. So we and also our 45 of 500 Miles and Dear Alex came out in 85. So we put two things out in 85. And then Gawk got fleshed out into a vinyl record in 87. So once again, our band became a working band, and we had no management or label. So nobody was there to say, you need to make another record. We were writing songs, dozens and dozens of songs. And then most of which will never see the light of day because they just got played live.
Sure.
And then then we moved to Nashville and got a publishing deal like before we'd even moved our furniture in the house. We moved to Nashville, signed a lease, and had an empty house, and we went on tour. We played a Nashville gig, we played DC, played New York, Boston, and by the time we got back, the people in Nashville saw us, called New York. People in New York saw us. We got back to Nashville. We signed with EMI Publishing, and then we made the record with Richard Goddard. So that was where, I'll tell you, it's in a review that got written about that Blow Me Up album. And there's nothing wrong with that record, but it is what the reviewer wrote, had heard Gawk and said, it sounds like a tomboy forced to wear her first dress.
That's
Meaning like,
odd.
that we had a spirit, and it was being squeezed into this polite version of ourselves,
Oh, okay.
rather than, I think, like I don't want to have to dress up for Sunday school, or your first haircut, like a little kid, like, oh, look at his cool long hair, let's cut it all off, make him look like all the other boys. So, and I mean, I have no regrets about any of it. It's just interesting when you do look back on stuff, you can see that whatever,
But
it
you
happened,
have to
here we are
progress.
today.
You have to
Well, yeah.
progress. I mean, you
Mhm.
can't play like if I go back, when I listen to stuff that you've done in the past, or a lot of bands too, not just you. There's
Yeah.
and having I've not had your type of success, but after a while you're ready to move on. And you
Yeah,
need
you
to.
got to, and I mean, by the time we even moved to Nashville, I had already gotten John Hyatt's "Bring the Family" record, which had a Ry Cooder playing slide guitar, and I'd gotten really into the Stones' "Exile on Main Street" record, and I was into Keith Richards' first solo record. So I hadn't even moved to Nashville yet, and I'd already had turned a corner that I was playing more like open tunings on the guitar
Hmm.
and playing slide more. And so I mean, I've heard demos of us doing those songs, some of the songs that ended up on solo records of mine or ended up in other things that I've done later. And I hear that the band was capable of doing those things. And also that Sam was still in the same direction, really. He was still in more of the rock, like pop rock
Sure.
direction, but like influenced by, the Smiths. And we always called him the Redneck Morrissey. And the Smiths and New Order and stuff. And and I could always do both too. I could do both, but it doesn't make for a focused
It doesn't.
career as a band. So like by the time we made that Blunderbuss record, which there's hardly any copies out there because it was such a typical, the record label, we recorded it and we didn't really have any guidance. I don't think the label ever intended to release it. They just let us sort of make a record for like 1/3 of the budget of the first record. And then they waited around and said, we're not putting it out. And so we found a home for it. By the time we did that, our band was really over, but we still played for another couple of years just to pay debts and things like that. And but I will say this too: a friend of mine who's a huge record collector and music fan, and he's also been my attorney for 30 years. He said those later shows of the Bushmen were great. He said, "You guys," I said, "Well, we were not having very much fun," and he said, "Yeah, but that tension makes for great rock and roll." And and now I can see it. I mean, I've listened to stuff that we did, and I'm like, yeah, I actually hear that if I was just in the audience without a horse in the race, that I could see how that if you're out in the audience with your beer in your hand and you're 19 or 20 or 21 or whatever, and the band's just frustrated, but we were never going to blow this. We weren't going to do the Replacements thing, like just walk off.
Right.
We were never going to do that. We had already played gigs. Like, there's bands that play shows and there's bands that play gigs, and we got to do both.
You did get to do both.
And I think that's helped me throughout this career now that's in, this like at 32 years alone just in Nashville. So, I owe Emmylou Harris calling me today. I've got to call her back. And I'm just saying that because she's one of my boss. She's somebody I work for. And that's just interesting. If I had told you that 30 years ago that Emmylou Harris would call me on my cell phone, first of all, I'd say, what's a cell phone? But, so I've made this, I have a career, it's great.
Let me play, I'm going to play just a little bit more of Will and the Bushmen, and then I want to kind of move on to some of your new stuff. But you mentioned Numbers. Numbers is probably my all-time favorite Will and the Bushmen song.
Oh, cool.
Let me play a little bit of this here.
Yeah. It's propulsive.
Guitar
for
work.
real.
Guitar work. I mean, even back then, it wasn't. There's nothing wrong with people playing chords. There's nothing wrong with the strumming thing.
Yeah.
That is great. But you, even back then, and Sam, you did play off of each other. You did call response with the notes. It was intricate, but deceptively easy on the ear. It wasn't so intricate that it was off-putting.
We both played in bands starting at 12 and played shows and practiced every day. And, so, I mean, I met Sam, we skipped school and jammed over at Richie Blair's house, and Bud Smith was there, and we were all like 14.
Sure.
I mean, maybe I was 13. They were 14 or 15. They were a little older, but, we jammed on Allman Brothers and Zeppelin and, whatever we could play that was. And so you were playing guitar stuff that did require some.
Right.
You had to figure it out, or like Pink Floyd. Bud had one of the best ears I'd ever heard in anybody, and he could figure out.
Never.
Yeah,
Bud Smith.
he passed. Sam and Bud are both passed away, and but Bud at that age could play, learn by ear all the Jimmy Page solos, David Gilmour. Anybody that was anybody in the 70s, he knew how to play all that stuff. He knew it. He could. So I got to play with him, and learn stuff from him. But yeah, it was just that time. I remember moving to Nashville and thinking, in the rock scene of Nashville at the time, that the Bushmen were the band that had put in the 10,000 hours or whatever the mythical, Malcolm
Sure.
Gladwell thing is. I realized that the first time we played. I was like, well, the band we're opening for is really good, but they just have like a 45-minute set, and that's what they do. Whereas we could play for 5 hours. We were like, you need us to play some more? Okay. I remember we played New York one time in like 88 or 89, and we played Woody's, which was Ron Wood's club. He wasn't there or anything, but it was just this basement rock club. And it was the first time anybody in New York had ever told us we could play for as long as we want. And then they had to kind of shut us down. They were, hey, you guys are great, but you got to quit. And they were like, how can you guys play for 2.5 hours? And we were like,
because that was the rule back then. That was, I remember playing at the booth in Tuscaloosa, and we'd start, they had this weird thing, I don't know if you remember or not, the
Sunday night at midnight.
yeah, we'd start at midnight and we'd play till 5 in the morning. I mean, it'd be
Yeah, I did
broad
it too.
daylight, you're walking
I did
outside
it
and
all the way through the early '90s. I mean, because I'd make so much money on that Sunday night gig. It'd be like $1 to get in, and you'd make $500 because so
was,
many people would come in between midnight and 5
yeah,
to get a
when you,
drink because they could open at midnight and serve you a drink.
yeah, that was like, and it would be packed. There'd like people just
Yeah.
like waiting, I don't know how the students fared with that, but when you went to Nashville, was there
Hmm.
any kind of, I mean, when I think of Nashville, I think of, and I can't think of this guy's name to save my life, but the guitar player for Webb Wilder,
Was it the Twangler
he was
or
just
Donnie Roberts?
I can't remember
The
his
guy that
name.
was originally the guy kind of looked like Mike Campbell.
Played a telly,
Yeah, his name was Donnie Roberts, the
and
Twangler.
played it
Oh
well,
man.
just
Oh yeah.
tasty. And was
Yeah.
there any kind of like, I gotta show up and know what I'm doing here at all, or is that why you moved to Nashville because it's an industry town?
We moved there because we were. I went to school. I never went to college until fall of '87, and the Bushmen had sort of run like the Mobile, like Thirsty scene, and everything was starting to kind of come to a lull. The excitement of it from the
Sure.
early '80s on, at least for us, for our band. People were sort of like not showing up, and so I went back to school, but as often happens in life, right? You make plans and make God laugh. So I went back to school, and then our band started doing better, and our gigs were farther away. So I'd go to school Monday through Thursday, and then I'd gig Thursday, Friday, Saturday out of town, and then we had this Sunday night gig we started doing. So I was just, for the first time in my life, I was like 7 days a week, and and 7 nights a week as well,
Wow.
and but we played shows in Nashville during that fall of '87. We opened for a guy named Bill Lloyd, who had a band called Foster and Lloyd with Radney Foster, and they had the day his indie pop record came out. Foster and Lloyd had a #1 song on country radio that was actually a great song called "Crazy Over You" that could be like Rockpile or something, or Nick Lowe. It's like a cool rockabilly song, like Dwight Yoakam, like
Sure.
good country rockabilly kind of music. Good song, great guitar, just great song. And so I remember going to Nashville and playing and opening for Bill, and Bill had an independent pop record and a #1 country record at the same time. And I thought, well, I can handle a town like this. It's wide open. They like us, and the Jason and the Scorchers guys were there, and Steve Earle was around, and John Hyatt was around, and Webb Wilder. We knew those
Hmm.
guys, and they were there, and a bunch of other band like gothy kind of bands like the Royal Court of China and Raging Fire, and everybody just knew each other. So it was a cool scene. And when we played opening for Bill, all these people from the industry were there, and they were all going, "You guys need to move to Nashville. You guys need to move." So I finished my semester at South Alabama, and we moved to Nashville. That's why January 1, '88, because the school year ended, Christmas holidays, we moved to Nashville, and then we went on tour. So we just went right back to being. We never stopped. We just were a working band, and we started to play outside of the South, and we got a deal.
Do you remember? I
And
don't know if it was before your time or not. There's and I think you even know him, a guy named Clark Parsons,
I know Clark, yeah.
and he was
He lives in Germany now.
yeah, he's in Germany and killing it in
Hmm.
Germany actually.
Yeah.
But he was at Vanderbilt and
Hmm.
was affiliated with the radio station there, and
We
they
were actually roommates at one point. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
WRVU. Yeah, and
Yeah,
yep.
city without a subway.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
compo.
Clark was huge for us because we got to come in, and Clark would vouch for us. I mean, we had fans, but he would vouch for us in the cooler, the people that were the cool kids. He knew them all, and he had the keys to the radio station.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, Clark wrote about us in the Nashville scene, and later in the Tennessean or the Banner, whichever he wrote for, and played us on the radio, and showed us some of the ropes of Nashville.
That
Yeah, he
album,
was great.
that city without a subway, it
Hmm.
was a compilation, and he had sent me a
Yep.
copy. And I mean, I'll be honest. At the time, I'd really never been anywhere, Will. And then and I had this notion of what Nashville was supposed to be.
Hmm.
And I remember when he sent me that, it was just like, wow, this is all good music. And there may be a little bit of a common thread. And honestly, my recollection is the only common thread was that it was all good tone, but
Hmm.
it was different kinds of music. And
Yeah, and the only difference then was from now is that there was more music industry, but they wouldn't cross, like the pop and rock world would not cross paths with country, and the labels, even though like you'd be on Columbia Records, but Columbia in New York or LA would never do anything with your record. So we got signed by SBK, which was an EMI Capital label in New
okay,
York and LA, and we were signed to EMI Publishing, but that didn't have anything to do with EMI Publishing in Nashville, except we would do demos at their studio, but they didn't have anything to do with it. And of course, now the record labels will do anything to try to sell a record. you know,
it's
Taylor
a
Swift with, Metallica or whatever, it's like the boundaries are down, but also the industry is not as necessary as it used to be for people to have a career.
now
Well,
you
for one thing, it's just not there.
it's not, and there's I mean, I think the way people do
I haven't.
things are completely different.
Yeah, you have to, and part of it's like holistic. It's like the industry changed, the way people do things changed, and then and so because of each thing, they affect the other all over and over again.
I,
I mean, they just legalized home studios in Nashville like the other day.
what?
Well, it's been an issue, like a tax issue, of course, and a parking issue. So if you had a home studio and you had like 10 cars parked in front of your house every day, it would be, they didn't want that to happen to neighbors.
Gotcha.
But there's thousands of home studios, and there has been forever here. And a friend of mine, actually, he had an unfriendly neighbor who tried to get him shut down. Now, he had built a beautiful studio in his backyard, and this guy tried to get him shut down, which is really an awful thing for your neighbor to do.
Sure, especially if you're not.
Instead of just saying, "Hey, man, can you just not have parking and just have people carpool?" Instead, and so he had to go to the city, and for years he had to go, "Can you please legalize me so I can work?" And you think Nashville would have, but yeah,
But maybe they
they
thought
finally legal.
saw it as a threat or something. Is that a
I do
possibility?
think in 20 years ago, it would have been a threat to the music industry to an extent, because when we got moved here, we got signed up and we had access to the studio. Although it would be more formalized than going out, me trotting out to my home studio
Sure.
every morning, especially now, like pad out there in my bare feet and work all day, and then or we'll do whatever I want unless I have actual work, for someone else. And even then, I'm by myself, so
No,
how do they know what I'm
that's
doing in there?
what do you
Heaven on
feel
earth,
like?
actually. But
What do you feel like? So 30 years, over 30 years, you've been in
hmm
Nashville. Will and the Bushmen kind of fade on. Now you're kind of there. You're doing what? What was your first like? What did you do?
well, just as the Inverted Oreos band that I had was bridge the gap, the very short gap between Ground Zero and Will and the Bushmen, I had a band called the Biscuits with Tommy Womack and Tommy Meyer and a guy named Michael Grimes, who now owns Grimey's Records and the Basement and the Basement East. So he's become quite a local mover and shaker in the music world. He owns the great record store. He owns the big club where 600-seat rock club, and the small club that has like the local, you know, open mic night. That's the
Right.
the vital one that actually the scene actually turns on. Um, so we had a band and we made a record. Once again, I was frustrated that the Bushmen had not made. We should have made like 5 records, instead of just 3. And so we formed the Biscuits, and I was like, we're gonna make a record, and we're gonna do it ourselves. We're not having some label tell us what to do. So we made our own record, and then Oh Boy Records picked it up, which is John Prine's label, the late
Okay.
great John Prine, and so they picked it up, and so all of a sudden I was in another band. I was actually, when the Biscuits were negotiating their deal, the Bushmen were still playing.
Okay.
So I just had sort of overlapping thing. And then by the time the Bushmen actually finished up and the Biscuits were trying to tour, I realized that things had changed, and I couldn't just piggyback onto the Bushmen's following and get people to come see us. And I also was tired of being in a Democratic band 24 hours a day where, every 3 days we had a 2-hour meeting over what our set list was going to be. Or
Right.
I was just tired of it. And I had met my wife, who is still my wife. And so I was, wanting to be with her. And so I decided I was going to go solo. And so I quit the Biscuits, broke the band up. My wife and I got married. And I sold my house. I had bought a house in East Nashville with my publishing advance for my record deal in the Bushmen, but times were kind of rough. And I had some debt incurred from the last Bushman time, you know, and so I decided that when we were going to get married, I would sell my house and we'd get completely out of debt. Now knowing what I had in that house, it was not a good idea to sell it because now it's like $1 million house. But anyway, but I'm fine. I'm in my house now. But we got married and started without debt and all my taxes all taken care of from the Bushman years. And I had like a year's worth of money to live on. If I lived like I knew how to live back then.
Right.
Like I had like $8,000 and that was plenty enough for me to live on a year, you know? So, so I wrote a bunch of songs and recorded them on my 4-track up in my attic. And then I started to run out of money and I was like, well, I wonder what I'm going to do. And I started like applying, maybe thinking about applying to go back to school or something. And then Todd Snyder called me, the singer-songwriter, and he had a deal with MCA Records that was the imprint called Margaritaville, which was, you can guess who owned that? Jimmy Buffett's label. And so I listened to Todd's record, and it got all this open tuning, like Keith Richards and slide, and this guy named Eddie Shaver played guitar on it, who's now passed away as well. One of the great roots guitar players that ever lived. I mean, just an amazing, like the Stevie Ray Vaughan of country, kind of in a way. Like
Sure.
That powerful, big tone, but it was kind of country rock, you know. And so I knew how to play that music, and it was a great song. So I took the gig, and so from 95, 96, 97, and into 98, I worked with Todd Snyder. We made a couple of records. I wrote some songs with him. And then he got dropped by MCA because by that time he was just on MCA Records proper. And he got dropped, so the tour support went away, the tour bus being paid for and all that stuff. And so he just had to tell us, guys, I got to send you home. Sorry. So I went home, and by that time I had a 3-year-old at home and a wife and another house. And so I just went looking for work. And also I made my first solo record, which is called This, and has Goodnight Moon on it, and is a it still has some like kind of, you know, Americana sort of pop rock kind of stuff on it. And
Can we play
Yeah.
Goodnight Moon? Let me play a
Yeah.
little bit of that, and then on the other side, let's
Mhm.
talk about this song. This is a great song.
Thank you.
I love this song.
Good night, moon. Good night, stars. Good night, old broke down cars. I'm gone away, leaving soon. Good night, darling. Good night, moon. I don't know where I'll be. I don't know if I'll see out the window.
Yeah. It's a whole different world from Numbers, right? You know.
But it's great because it's that less is more kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, though. I mean, to my ears, to hear it, you know, coming from what I was used to hearing you play and seeing
Right.
you play live, and
Right.
all those times I've seen you at like 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And then to hear you do something like this, to me it was cool because it's very honest. It's just a very honest song, and
Yeah.
these kind of low production is not the right word, but where it's just softer volumes, you can hear everything really well, and it's just a very, you know, out there. You know, when I say out there, I mean it's present. It's great.
I got a lot of experience working in the studio between the Bushmen and I had learned a lot, and I'd started to try to emulate the stuff that I'd really, fallen in love with, like, the Tom Waits records and lower key, beautiful old records and Billie Holiday records and stuff like that, and trying to hear, just the sound of people in a room playing, and honor that sound rather than just trying to fill every corner of the room with
Right.
sound, which is a fun thing to do. And that's what, like, Numbers is definitely like, we are filling the room with sound, and we all have our parts, and and it's very intricate. And but yeah, like you said earlier, you got to grow. So sometimes if you've done an intricate thing when you're like 19, then you need to clear it out a little bit, and I mean, a lot of artists do that. I remember Springsteen's, when he put out his stuff, got sparser and sparser and more spaced out in a way, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no. One of the things that I find really neat about your career, you've got, gosh, how many solo albums do you have now? It's
9.
9. And
Yeah.
the work with all the bands that you've
Yeah.
done, and you're writing this music, and I think that's great, and it's next level stuff. But the part that's impressive to me, to be quite honest with you, is your lyric writing. Gosh, how can I say this? You get it. You get in a key. It's a and I, at least for me, it's it's probably loosely based on a 1-4-5 type progression. Maybe I'll throw in a
Yeah.
minor chord in there to make it neat. But you're writing this really good music. It's solid music. But then it's just, I mean, you have a ton of songs, and none of the lyrics in my mind are just silly throwaway lyrics. They all feel like there's something behind them.
Yeah. Well, I've been writing my whole life, since I was a young teenager. And so I think, and also I've worked with, I've been in Nashville for 32 years. So there's a lot of crap that comes out of Nashville. There's also, my across the street neighbor was David Olney, who's one of the great lyric writers in my mind of all time. Like, he could write a 10-minute story and you'd be interested in, like, the whole damn, and with no guitar solos, just words,
Right.
like a Leonard Cohen kind of thing, or Dylan. And I worked with Rodney Crowell, who's a similar person. Todd Snyder, his one of his fan websites is called 18minutes.com, because Todd has told stories to an audience before they're as long as 18 minutes, and you could hear a pin drop. That's a long time to tell a story
It is.
at a music gig. That's like Springsteen type stuff, so, and but anyway, so I worked with a lot of those people. So you can't help but be influenced by people that you work with, unless you just hate it, and then you're like, I'll never do that again,
Right.
But working with Rodney and Todd, being around people like John Prine, Guy Clark, David Olney, Emmylou, it'll and then all these other people in between. The all music. I've played on like a couple hundred records for people.
Can I show some
At
pictures
least.
of
Yeah.
different people that you've played with? Let me pull this up here and kind of talk us through who we're looking at. Let me make sure your mic doesn't go out though.
Just me playing with myself.
That's just you playing with yourself. Love that guitar though. That is an
Yeah.
awesome guitar. Let's see, we have here. So that's you again. Awesome. Also a great guitar. So here's you and
Emmylou.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Working with Jimmy Buffett.
Jimmy Buffett. Now you had
In the
related
studio.
a story to me that I think is kind of funny, where somebody accused you, not accused you, but like, hey, you're doing a Jimmy Buffett cover, and you're like,
I wrote that song.
I wrote that song. I mean, that's kind of funny.
But for a songwriter, it's beautiful, because what you want is to have a song that somebody recorded that nobody knows you wrote, as long as you get the royalties. Because I wrote the song and put it on a record already, so I've already gotten my ego out version of it out, and then somebody else took it that sells more records, and I can pay my bills.
Well, how many people? I mean, you mentioned John Prine, and he was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we are. I mean, it was a big loss. And how many people have heard his songs and not realized that, done by others, and not realize he was
Right.
the guy that wrote it. He was that guy
Yeah.
that was and he seemed comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I remember, Yeah, I think so. And there's another great artist named J.J. Cale who passed away. And, his most famous songs were done by Eric Clapton. He wrote Cocaine, and he wrote, he wrote Call Me the Breeze that Skinner did.
Sure.
And he also wrote After Midnight. So those are his biggest songs. And I remember when he passed, I found rarely did interviews, but I found an audio interview and I played it in my car while I was traveling somewhere one time. And one of the things he said was, the interviewer asked him, well, do you ever wish that you were famous like Eric Clapton and that he, maybe he wrote the songs and you did them? He goes, oh, no. He said, I'm in the fine print. I'm a fine print guy. He said, if you read the little liner notes on the record, I'm in there. It says, this song written by J.J. Cale. And I'm fine with that, but I like both. I like to perform. I like to make records of my own, but I also am happy with other people doing my songs because it's just a continuation of doing it.
Sure.
The most famous singer-songwriter of all time is Bob Dylan, and his songs have been recorded thousands of times by
Sure.
people. And I don't know whether he has any feelings about it or not, but it certainly allowed him to make a living until he sold 1 million records.
Sure.
And I'm never going to sell 1 million records, so I need to make a living all the time.
Right. And you mentioned
But it's not really just about money. I mean, I write the songs for my own enjoyment. I've never really been like, I wrote some songs for this new Jimmy Buffett record that just came out, and I wrote with him sort of over the phone because we couldn't get together. It wasn't about pandemic, but it was
Right.
about just schedules and
schedules.
geography. And we wrote songs over the phone, but it was perfectly good. And I think we did just as well. We just would send stuff back and forth. And anyway, it was interesting. But I was sort of writing for a particular project. But at this point, there is a certain amount of craft that you can invoke without any kind of like feeling like, oh, I'm compromising myself. It's like, I'm just doing, what he wants is me to do my thing. He likes what I do. And he's just like, hey man, write some lyrics for this verse. And I'm like, okay, what's the story? He's like, well, this guy delivers the mail on the Magnolia River in Magnolia Springs, but he's also a songwriter. And then some weird story he made up. So I wrote some words and I sent it to him because I'm not afraid to just say, hey, this is what I think. And if you don't like it, tell me you don't like it. I'll write something else.
So
It's not that I don't care. It's that I enjoy the creativity as much as I enjoy being inspired, like being like, I'm inspired by my life. I can also be inspired by someone's idea and just work.
so he gives you that seed and you kind of go with it. But for other stuff that you've written for,
Mm-hmm.
is there a pool of tunes? I know like some songwriters, they keep a catalog and people go through that catalog and they kind of pick and choose, or do you tailor a song like that for somebody, like, and say, hey, I'm going to work with you, or I want to do your song? Does that
That song, I actually wrote the music to it, and I wanted it to. I just wrote something I felt when I thought of a mailman delivering mail in a boat in Magnolia Springs, Alabama, on the Magnolia River down by the bay in the Gulf. I thought of something that sounded sort of like almost old timey, but it needed to be able to have drums and the whole band on it. So I did something that I thought maybe would be a little bit like Little Feat or the Grateful Dead, kind of funky rock, but light on its toes, nothing heavy, but not country either. So it's
Sure.
almost like a country blues, but the whole band can play the bass, the drums, the horn section, the steel drums, all the stuff that Jimmy Buffett has. And it turned out great. And I played on the record and played the finger picking guitar with acoustic slide, and then um, and then he rewrote all the stuff I wrote to just tweak it. He gave me like a storyboard. I wrote a song and then he tweaked it. It was
Sure.
great, fascinating way to work.
Now, did I see you guys play? Did I see you play with Buffett at, was it the Gulf Shores, at a Gulf Shores
Hmm.
festival one time?
Yeah,
That was actually televised. I mean,
yeah,
that was great. I mean, that was
yeah.
really
That was
cool.
concert for the Gulf after the oil spill, and it originally was going to be a big country thing, and they were going to have Toby Keith and Kenny Chesney, but they had to change the date because there was a hurricane in between the oil spill and the concert.
Right.
And so they had to change the date, and the country stars weren't available. So he got Jesse Winchester and Alan Toussaint. So I actually got to play with Alan Toussaint and Jesse Winchester, who are two of my favorite. I mean, Alan Toussaint's just one of the greats of all time, American music. I mean, the songs he wrote that the Stones did and everybody covered, Yardbirds, plus all the New Orleans songs.
Sure.
He wrote all those songs. And it's like, I didn't even know it. I thought I knew about nerdy liner notes. But anyway, so I got to play with him, and then he died right after that, and Jesse Winchester did too. So that was really cool. I mean, of course, it's cool to play for 40,000 people with Jimmy Buffett, and you're basically Gulf Shores, basically my hometown, and but to have all those other people there instead of really playing with those country guys who I don't really care as much about, I like Hank Williams, but I don't care that much about Kenny Chesney. He's fine. I have nothing against him. I don't, his music doesn't interest me that much, but Alan Toussaint, I got to play, I know we can make it. I know darn well we can work it out. I know we can. I was up there playing that with him in front of 40,000, redneck
That had to be a
Riviera.
rush. That had to be a big
It was
rush.
like, what am I doing here? So,
I suspect it had something to do with your talent.
But there's one thing I know about living in this town is that Nashville is that there's so many people with so much talent, and a lot of it is just being willing to say. People ask you to do something, and if you think you might be able to do it, just say yes. Just say yes and go show up. I mean, I've engineered records where I had no business doing it. Produced records where I didn't even know what that meant. Played instruments on records that I just claimed I could play, and then someone handed me one. I learned to play the banjo on a recording session. I didn't learn to play. I learned to play enough to play on a record. Somebody was like, wish we had banjo for this. And I was like, well, I think it's in open G. I think I can play. And they were like, the next thing I know, I've got a banjo and an expensive German mic in front of me. But then now I've played the banjo on like 20 records, not that I'm that great at it, but I'm willing to try. And that's part of the equation, I think.
I love the banjo. I actually, this came up in a recent conversation about 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe it's been a little bit longer now. I'm a rock guy, I'm definitely a rock guy. And so one night I was thinking about it all night, and then I woke up the next morning and I told my wife, I'm like, I want to learn how to play the banjo. And she's like,
what?
Exactly what that is. As what she said. Well, like, what are you talking about? I'd never shown any inclination other than I really liked the movie "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou."
Yeah.
Nothing that would give her any kind of like, I married a banjo guy, and
from Alabama.
From Alabama. That was probably why I resisted. I was like, I can't do
banjo on your knee.
I want to play a song of all your songs that of your solo albums. Wings is my favorite album. I love the last album, but Wings, there's just something about it. And I want to play Three Angels, which is off of that album. So let me play this real quick.
Wake me up each morning tugging at my sleeve, and 3 angels see me off to bed each night. I never did believe until I saw them for myself. They don't have wings and halos, they don't dress in white. They don't have wings and halos, they don't dress in white.
What's the story behind that song?
I just wanted to write a love song to my daughters and my wife, and then I had that cool little finger picking guitar riff, and it just came together real easy. It was I wanted to write something sweet for my. It's getting dark in here. I don't want to turn on the lights behind me, so I'm just like sort of sitting there in the dark. The disembodied head.
Nice.
But I wrote. So I had that little guitar riff, and I wrote. I just tried to write something that would be a love song for my family without being maybe try to make it a little universal. So I got 2 daughters and 1 wife. Then I wrote, 3 angels wake me up each morning tugging at my sleeve. 3 angels see me off to bed each night. I never did believe until I saw it for myself. They don't have wings and halos. They don't dress in white. I was thinking about like they're real angels in my life. They're not made up Christmas ornament angels.
Sure.
They're like, so, and then they sometimes in the morning they're a moody, I'm the guy that lives with 3 women, my wife and 2 daughters, and sometimes in the morning they're a moody band of angels. It's good to have my angels hanging around. So I just try to write plain language.
How old are your
That's
daughters?
been, my youngest is 19 and my oldest is about to be 25.
Do they, either one of them, have any proclivity or interest or talent in music at all?
My
Or?
my oldest daughter is a very talented visual artist,
Okay.
and my youngest daughter has been formally more of a musician. They both, I think, have a good ear and could play music if they wanted to. I think they both aren't pursuing it the way I did. I mean, my parents would like open the door and be like, put that, I'd have the guitar in the dark in the bed playing scales, I had to be pried out of my hands. And, so and I don't think they're like, I don't want to live the horrible life my dad's lived. It's nothing like that. It's like,
Sure.
they just have other interests and they've seen what I do. And so it's not as exotic to them either. They're not like,
Right.
music, I want to do music. They're like, yeah, music, whatever.
Who was
They love music and they know all about it, but they're not musicians.
who was helping you out on that track? Who was who was doing the backup vocals on that?
That is Julie Lee. And I think she now lives in North Carolina, but she is a great, she was in a band called, I think she was in Crooked Still, but she's really, really great. From bluegrass world, singer songwriter person, and she came in and did this wonderful vocal thing, and really added to it. We brought her in to sing harmony, and she really added something special to it. She's a great singer,
How
real
does that
artist.
how does that work with your other stuff that you've done, your solo stuff? Do you have a core group of people? Do people come and go? Do you guys like barter for time? I'll play on your project if you play on mine. Is that
All of the above. I mean, I have different eras of people that tend to play with me, and then those guys that played on Wings, the rhythm section. It's like a rhythm section and me, and then the producer engineer David Henry, who now is a school teacher and he's a cellist as well. He played the cello stuff on there, and then I would play pretty much. One song on there has a horn section, and that's my friend Jim Hoke and a trumpet player. And Jim wrote the horn charts, and they came in and played. But so basically, it's like me in a rhythm section, and then extraneous things like strings, horns, things that I can't play. Because I can play the one-handed organ and piano stuff,
okay?
and all the guitars and mandolins and banjos and stuff like that, and even some bass. But I had a great rhythm section: Tim Marks on bass and Paul Griffith on drums. Paul has now moved to California, and Tim is a father of 2 and is just not playing as actively as he was
Right.
when I first met him. He was a young whippersnapper, young single guy when I first met him, and now he's a dad and a husband, and he's busier. So and so it's sort of like time just moves on, and you sort of end up with other people.
So
And
you
I
have,
mean, I work a lot with Brian Owings, who was Will and the Bushmen's drummer, and so we still play. We've been playing together since 1980. I mean, I used to jam with him at the Nick in Birmingham as early as like 84,
wow,
85. So we've been playing together for 35 years,
wow.
which is pretty awesome.
You have been
Still
keeping.
never had an argument.
Well, that's
It's
rare.
fantastic. Yeah.
You have been keeping very busy during this COVID mess.
Mhm.
You do a lot of live streams from your porch. You do
Yep.
clips and pieces, sometimes more than once through the day. And I feel like that's very helpful to
It is to me for sure.
and to the rest of us too. What drives that? What makes you get up and do that and not just not do
Well,
anything?
this is what I mean, I've been on the road 200 days a year for 35 years. So not going on the road is, on one hand, wonderful. This is the most I've been home in 25 years. On the other hand, I'm used to doing a lot of stuff. I'm used to being on the road and working in the studio and writing songs and producing records for people. And so I wanted to keep, I'm used to it. I'm a happier person if I'm working. And so I just made myself some work, and I put it out there that I would. And so I've had a lot of home studio work. I've made a solo acoustic record that's going to come out in the fall, and I've started a Patreon thing, and I started playing online, and I just like to stay busy, and that's that. I mean, I've written a lot of songs and recorded a lot of songs, and it's something that I need to do.
What are some of the ways that people can contribute to that? You mentioned Patreon. What are some of the other ways?
I do online shows, and it's mostly like Facebook, and it's just tip based, but it does really well for me too. And then I'm always willkimbrough.com, and I'm will@willkimbrough.com. If anybody needs guitar, mandolin, mandola, banjo, keyboards, harmonies, percussion, fuzz guitar, 12-string guitar, baritone guitar, electric bass,
speed metal. I've seen him.
Speed
I've seen
metal,
him do it. It may not advertise
finger
it, but
picking, slide, blues, and need me to play on your project, I'll talk to you about it, and we'll figure it out. And I do a lot of studio work at home. I've actually just played on some records for people in other studios where you just go wear the mask all day and stay away from each other.
Do people send you stems and things like that and say, hey, play along with this stem and send it back? And
yes. Yeah, all the time.
So
so that's been good, just keeping the work going. And I've got 4 songs on the new Jimmy Buffett record, and that's good because that's in the pipeline for me, and that relationship's been just rewarding in all ways. And
are you at a
looking
place?
Forward to, mm-hmm.
Are you at a place where your publishing is generating anything? Are you doing okay with that? I mean,
everything I've ever put out is in the system, the sort of the system.
Right.
And so I've got like now, I think 15 or 16 songs that I've written or co-written on Jimmy Buffett records. So yeah, I do. I mean, we average it out. It makes a big impact on our lives, my songwriting. So that's part of the reason I do it is that it's my job. But I've learned that it's what I always wanted to do, and now I need to do what I wanted to do. So that's great. It's like a great marriage of like desire and need. That is what I want to do. It's like my hobby is my job.
What's the next release? What's the
It's called Spring Break, and it's done, and it's coming out officially in October through the distributor that I use called Soundly, which goes through the Orchard, which is used to be Sony Red distribution for those that follow that kind of geekery.
Sure.
But and so it'll be in stores and on digital and all that stuff, and I'll do a pre-sale on my website first, and it'll be on vinyl, it'll be on CD, it'll be on streaming, it'll be on it'll be digital, and then I don't I have a couple of gigs on the books. I had a ton, and they all got moved or canceled,
Sure.
and just like everybody, and so I'm looking at the shows that are on the books and not knowing whether I'll play them or not, but I'll be continuing to play online. And the Patreon thing has been, I write whatever I'm writing and that I feel like sharing with people that I've recorded. I'll share this like new music every month that's never been released, which is really
cool.
Fun. Like I'm doing that I was doing it all along anyway. I was writing songs and recording them, and then a record would come out every few years. And now it's like I have an outlet for those songs just to share with people. And I'm working on a book that sort of talks about this story of the love of music over the course of now into the 5th decade of really thinking about it every day, and playing it every day, and writing songs and still being inspired. And I think it's an interesting story because there's a lot of great Shaggy Dog rock and roll stories along the way. There's the opening there's playing at the Pine Grove when I was 13, and all these bikers showed up, and we ended up playing at their house, and then opening for REM, and all the Bushmen stories through the record deal stuff, and the going to New York to record and going to Woodstock to record, and then touring, and then just it all falling apart. But it was always fun, and all the Biscuit stuff, and the John Prine stuff, and the Emmylou stuff, and the Todd Snyder stuff, and the Rodney Crowell stuff, and the Buffett stuff. It's never ending because it never slowed down much. It slowed down enough for me to get to know my wife, and we got married, and that's great. I'm really lucky because otherwise I would have just had my head down and getting in the van.
Well,
So you actually have a life
No, and that's
beyond
important.
that.
That's important.
Hmm.
I've got a wife and a kid, and um, it sort of polishes you somehow. Is that the
It's
right
it's
word?
it's the most natural thing in the world, and doing the natural thing is the right thing.
It is. It is the
You
right
don't have to
thing.
have kids, but I do, so I can't get out of it now. And I love it.
No,
And
I
my
love
kids
it
are so
too.
big.
I love
Yeah.
it too.
It's the best thing, it's the best thing. And then it just enhances everything else, and it allows you to use up some of that energy that you really don't need, except for, you really need a lot of that energy just to work and take care of your family. And then the other creative energy can be actually focused a little bit better,
No,
maybe every once in a while.
I totally agree with that.
I can just sit in the dark, like, look, I'm in the dark. Oh.
I, you posted something today. It was about 30 minutes long, and you
Hmm.
keep on smiling, and then you did a little bit of a preach after that, and
Hmm.
I really liked what you had to say. And
Thank you.
can you kind of recap that a little bit? It was
Yeah, there's always, I mean, we live in this world where everybody has their voice on the internet, and everybody's got their political view, and really there's like the two main ones that all hate each other, and I've got mine, and but I do think that in order to, I know that being a self-employed person my whole life, that you have to get along with people.
you do
Corky, the great guitarist Corky Hughes from Mobile, says his wife told him when they first got married. She said, "Now, Corky, you got to get in the get along club." And he was like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You got to get in the get along club. You got to get along, or you're not gonna have very much fun with me, especially." And he was like, "Okay," but in other words, you don't have to be a pushover, but it's just about listening to other people and accepting them, unless they're hurting you or hurting somebody
right.
literally, then let them have their view. And maybe your view's not so important to have to express all the time. Of course, I was expressing mine for 30 minutes today on Facebook, so I'm one to talk. But what I was trying to say is listen to other people, um, think about what unites us, and think about it every day, and think about it with your friends, and think about it with people that, I mean, and we are, whether we like it or not, we're stuck with each other. We're all we have.
We are.
We're all we have. And our relationships, we're animals that need to talk and tell stories and communicate with words. We're not birds or dogs, and we can't just eat some berries and poop on somebody's head and sleep in a nest. We have to do all this other extra stuff. We're humans, so if we don't get along, it's going to be terrible. So I just said, I just heard so many different things recently that just made me. Somebody was talking on Facebook about, I put this post out there to see who my friends are, and that's one of the things I said today. It's like, I know who my friends are.
Right.
I know who my friends are, and there's
Right.
so way too many of them that I never get to see. That it's like, why would I want to, like, make some kind of weird social experiment of politics? It's already a horrible social experiment. I mean, democracy is a beautiful social experiment that can be ugly at times because people get to say what they think. They can't do that in China, but at least respect that right, so that we're not just fighting all the time for over nothing.
Right. There's
You
a
know,
lot of this is, and I hate to be the get off my lawn guy, but a lot of this is, internet driven, I feel like. And,
sure, you're
back,
by yourself. You're not actually having to talk to somebody in
right.
person.
I
And
mean, back in the day, you're doing shows. I guarantee you, I've seen you play in front of, 1,000 people or more. And I guarantee you, in those 1,000 people, there were opposing views.
oh
And
yeah,
the point wasn't to get there and argue. It was to get there and enjoy this music thing.
right,
And I'm not trying to overlook social issues, but at the same
yeah,
time, we worked through it before,
right, yeah.
um, and it
And
wasn't
we are
like
working through it now with the internet, and that's just the thing we have to learn to do. We have to learn to not send that response or not send that email. We all have to learn that in our work, right? You're
yeah,
wanting to write just a scathing thing to somebody, and you go, I'm not going to write that. You have to learn to do that to work. And what's the difference in that relationship and your everyday life? Well, your everyday life should even be more precious to you.
Right. More considerate.
But it's all the same to me. That's one of the things about doing what I do, is that like it's all, and I assume to an extent with you, right? I mean, it's like this is what I do. This is my work. So I have to care for it. And that means I have to let people be so that they'll let me be, because my job is to get out there and,
Absolutely. No, I
show
live in
show some
Kansas.
stuff. Hmm.
I have the knack for living in these, I've lived in Georgia, I've lived in Alabama, I live in Kansas. And I may lean liberal, but I've lived in conservative places, and I've found wonderful people everywhere I've lived.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've
And
only lived in Alabama and Tennessee and traveled all around, but still, yeah, of course, man. It's like people are beautiful, but you gotta get to, you
get
gotta let
along.
them let them tell you a little bit of their story, so that you can hear that they're just another person like you. So
Well, that is awesome. Anyway, I appreciated that you put that out, and I appreciate you doing this tonight. This is just wonderful to get to sit here and chat with you like that.
thank you.
And
It's been a pleasure.
it's been awesome. I am gonna say goodnight. I am gonna wish you well, and
You
keep
too,
on
brother.
writing and keep playing, and I'm gonna keep on watching your streams, and we're gonna for those of you that are out there, please do go to willkimbrough.com, and do go to his Facebook page, and do contribute to
Check me out.
the Vimeo and PayPal and all those good things.
I got to get the
because-
lights turned back on here.
yeah. See what happens? It just the lights are already
Sitting
out.
in the dark is terrible.
It's art is
Somehow
important.
I'm able to keep this computer running.
This whole channel was started on the notion that art's important. Whatever you're doing, it helps. It helps us during these times. It's good to do. It helps us
Right.
as artists to express,
Yeah.
but it helps me to listen to other people. I feel better. I just feel better.
Yeah.
At ease. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say goodnight, Will, and I'm actually going to play. I think I'm going to play. Hey Trouble, which I
Cool.
find to be an immensely awesome song.
Thank you. I love that one too.
It is a good song. This is off your last album.
Yeah, and I got a shout out. I wrote this with Rich McCulley, and we've probably written 20 great kind of songs like that during this time. We write over FaceTime. He's from California, but he lives in El Paso right now because he moved to where his child lives, and so he's a California guy. He's lived in L.A. and San Francisco for like the last 30 years. Now he's in El Paso.
Nice.
So he's having a whole new. Plus he's there, and he moved there, and then this happened. So he doesn't even know anybody.
Oh my gosh.
But he's been writing songs over FaceTime. And anyway, I wrote this with Rich. So shout out to Rich McCulley and his awesome little boy Jarvis, and
Okay.
and hello to El Paso.
Well, this is
Que
a great
pasa, El Paso?
Que pasa. This is a great song. It's good songwriting. It's well done. It's well recorded. It's just
Thanks, Ivan.
It's just very good all the way around. So once again, Will, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, man.
And looking forward to your next work.
Me too, brother.
Have a good one, brother.
Let's do it again sometime.
We will. Absolutely. Have a good night.
Take care.
Wow. That was awesome. And Will has always just been the most approachable guy. And, like I said, I've been watching this guy play since I was probably 15 or 16 years old. And I've always been that guy that's been more influenced by local musicians than, national musicians. And I used to be right there in the front row watching him play. And he's been a big influence on me. And his message about this, getting along, there's a lot to that. My goodness, there's a lot to that. And it's just a great idea that, that we can find something that we can agree on. It's not to gloss over the issues or problems. I don't think anybody's suggesting that, but it shouldn't be so ugly. It really shouldn't. So I'm going to say goodnight to you guys as well. And like I said, I am going to close out with one of his songs. Again, it's called Hey Trouble, and this is a great tune. And I just want to say goodnight, and you guys have a great day and great evening, and have a good weekend.
and my good gal was gone. A black cat crossed my mind. I ain't superstitious, but I've been thinking I was born on the wrong side, and the train has left the station, and she's gone on down the line. Heaven knows I've been forsaken. I got trouble by my side. Hey, trouble, let's go for a ride. I'm a long black Lincoln on a lost highway, headed nowhere, driving blind. I ain't got nobody to care about me. There's only broken ties that bind, and the train has left the station, and she's gone on down the line. Heaven knows I've been forsaken. I got trouble by my side. Hey, trouble, let's go for a